Okay, let's see. We got somebody came to the door the other day just as we were finishing up, and I was just talking about a possible tree break we found down the lane. Sapling had been coming back up from the roots. Not sure what kind of tree it is, but we have of the half a dozen new trunks coming up from the roots. One of them is broken to the south, one's broken to the north. They're broken about 3 or 4 different directions. Probably nothing. So anyway, I thought I would go on and read chapter 8 from Inside Out for you guys. And things are starting to get more interesting here, I think. So chapter 8, To Columbia, Missouri, China, and the World. In July 1971, just downriver, 20 miles from the cabin, some people around Louisiana, Missouri saw, heard, and experienced what came to be called Momo, the Missouri Monster. Our local news reported about how awful the smell was and that everybody was pretty excited. There was a lot that did not come out at the time, and I did not connect it to the feelings of dread I had felt at the cabin the previous summer. The episode, being so close to home, did put Bigfoot on my radar, though I couldn't imagine how any animal could be that elusive. I did not doubt that the people had seen something, since I had seen a something myself. Mine had just been up in the sky. It was a puzzle, and I let it go at that. I transferred to the University of Missouri, Columbia, for the fall semester of 1971. The first thing I remember about that is a letter from the draft board that said my 2S deferment had been canceled. Oops. I checked into it and found that I had been given an incomplete in one honors program course. I never missed that class or any class, and I thought I had done everything I was supposed to. So I called the professor back in Manhattan, Kansas, and I said, my fate is literally in your hands. He said he didn't think one missing term paper should carry such a penalty, and he would supply the needed grade. I remain in his debt even as I write this. I basically replied, up the revolution, or something like that, and he got the joke. The class was the study of revolution in Western societies, or some such thing. And resisting the Vietnam draft was part of the latest real-world chapter at that time. He said, you get an A, and I got his joke. The class was pass-fail. My 2S would remain intact until they filmed the last chopper leaving Saigon. I remember hearing the church bells ringing all over Columbia, Missouri, the night peace was formally announced. I am naive. I thought wars were over. Go. I have family who served in the Vietnam War. Their advice to me had been, this is a quote, if you let them send you here, you need your head examined, unquote. My beef was always with Congress and the president, not my friends, family, Baha'i medics, or any other soldiers who found themselves in harm's way. If you have served, then thank you for your service. I mean that sincerely, but it seems an insufficient gesture, and my beef with those who sent you remains the same. For me, the government and the people who elected them should stand by our veterans with federal funds and properly functioning agencies until they are truly home, however long it takes. The private groups need to collect money for what our tax dollars don't do for veterans seems wrong. But that, too, is not what we are about in this story. The story is not about division, but about uniting the various relevant threads running through my own highly strange experience. So back to that. After I transferred, I learned there were actually Baha'is in Columbia, Missouri. By this time, I was driving an older Dodge window van with the engine between the front seats. I actually loved that vehicle, but it wasn't running right, and the engine would die at every red light. I was given a phone number for a Baha'i couple in town who would soon become my close friends. I called them, got the address, and drove over there to say hello that evening, and hit green lights at every intersection along the way. It's a nothing, a gift from the intersection angel, but I noticed it and mentioned my good fortune when I arrived, even as the engine sputtered to a stop in their driveway. My girlfriend, Barbara, soon transferred to MU as well. She had become a Baha'i at the Oklahoma-Texas Baha'i Summer School in Richardson, Texas. As young Baha'is, who it turned out are conscientious cooperators, hence primarily medics if drafted, we got busy doing what Baha'is do. Together, we helped to form the first local spiritual assembly in Columbia, Missouri, and attended national Baha'i conferences in Oklahoma City and St. Louis. At some point during this time, Barbara and I were sitting in my car in the parking lot behind my apartment complex on High Street in Columbia, Missouri. We were talking about getting married, but I had not actually proposed yet. At some point, we hugged each other there in the front seat, and a moment later, it felt like a group hug. We both felt enveloped by the hug of some sort of pure love. It was electric. We instantly jumped back in surprise. Did you feel that? We both asked. Yes, I did, we both replied. We took it as a confirmation that we were on the right track. We think of it as a hug from Abdu'l-Baha, but of course, we have no way to know that. There's a wide range of personages that it could have been, and I am sure that someday, whoever it was may reveal themselves. Also, one of the seekers we knew was becoming serious about the faith. She lived next to a little corner grocery behind the Sigma Nu house, and she told me the story. She had been praying at her window, which looked out onto the street, hoping for a sign. There was a sudden flash of light. It was undoubtedly the setting sun glinting off a car window as the door was opened. She looked up from her prayer, and there I stood. I had just gotten out of the car. I needed orange juice. This was in the winter because I had on a quilted red farm service jacket and a black faux fur hat with ear tabs. If she ever did declare as a Baha'i, I am sure it was not because of me. I mention this because she found it synchronistic for her and told me so. That sort of thing may be an indicator as I ask myself, only upon looking back, why me? Now, Mike Cleland has said of himself, I didn't sign up for this. But I too am a seeker after truth, the ones I haven't unraveled yet. The connections described in the writings illuminate the road forward as we meet other species of mankind and join the ranks of whatever initiation situation we have going on here. I did sign up for this. I have never asked why me until writing this book, and I deal with that question for you. I have never seen knowing this stuff or having paranormal experiences as a burden. Some people certainly do, many for good reason. But even that, the way our society often maligns anyone talking about their strange experiences, is also an indicator that we on Earth are still adolescents, not yet come of age. Pardon me. Furthermore, I do not want to communicate with the other adults in the cosmos when they feel I do want to communicate with the other adults in the cosmos when they feel I'm ready. I am pretty sure I am not ready at this writing. I'm just putting that out there into the universe for now. My confidence comes and goes. I think part of preparing for communication is by showing other earthly humans positive ways to think about it all collectively. The writings themselves say that is why they are here now. One answer lies in a book entitled The Promised Day Is Come. There are other books too numerous to mention here. You are free to disagree, especially when we get to the who should we be part of this book. But as we will discuss, the writings have a lot to say about that, and some of it will probably match what you already believe anyway. You'll decide for you. and you might find these writings helpful for reasons that I will explain when we get to the 2023 MUFON Symposium part. But I repeat myself and will again. That's foreshadowing. Then, in 1973, Barbara and I had the first Baha'i wedding in Boone County, Missouri. We got married on a farm owned by the family of one of the Baha'is. It was a lovely meadow by a lake just a little east of Columbia and about a mile south of Interstate 70. Our friend and newly declared Baha'i, Kathy, helped us make smoked salmon and cream cheese on bagel sandwiches for our wedding guests. We lost touch with Kathy over the years, but she remains forever in our hearts, and I mention her here just in case she is still into the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind and thus might see this book. Also, a few years later, as the Baha'is were constructing the Ark on Mount Carmel, as called for in the writings, they needed funds. So Barbara and I decided to contribute, but having very little cash, we decided to sacrifice. And that is how the engagement ring that led to the first Baha'i wedding in Boone County, Missouri, was sold, and all the proceeds donated to the construction of, quote, a far-flung ark that would become the world's center of the Baha'i faith. That fall, we were off to Sacramento, California, where I had been accepted into law school. For the next 3 years, I mostly saw the inside of a law library. Strange, but not highly strange. We also served on the Sacramento Local Spiritual Assembly and did what Baha'is do. On a couple long weekends, clueless, we camped at high elevation at Yosemite and Grass Valley, California, sometimes under the stars. Luckily, we didn't vanish or get eaten. While on a summer break in June of 1975, Barbara and I went on our first Baha'i pilgrimage to Haifa, Israel. Haifa and the airport at Tel Aviv were more like the movie Exodus back then than the very modern places they are now. One afternoon, our pilgrim group of a couple dozen Westerners attended a formal open-air gathering in front of a rather large excavation into the side of Mount Carmel. This turned out to be the dedication of the future seat of the Universal House of Justice, the supreme administrative body of the faith. Many renowned souls were in attendance that day, but Barbara and I were relatively new to the faith, had no idea who was who, or why we were spiritually overwhelmed, and at the time didn't realize the import of what was actually taking place, or that both Barbara and I would be here again later in life in other capacities. When the ceremony was over, on a lark, we decided to climb the rest of the way up Mount Carmel. It didn't look that hard. More of a steep hike, really, and there was a grand hotel up there, possibly a Hilton, that promised a good restaurant. Also, we must have slipped away accidentally, unnoticed, as people were leaving because nobody stopped us, and they should have. We were eventually greeted at the top by a couple soldiers armed with Uzis who had watched our ascent and had decided not to shoot us for terrorists. They calmly told us as much and advised against any further stunts like that. In hindsight, I have come to truly appreciate their restraint, and I am forever in their debt as well. I definitely want to thank them for their service. While in Israel, one of the pilgrims in our group, with some sort of special skill, I didn't remember what, was asked to remain and serve the faith at the World Center in Haifa, and the young lady said, sure. I found that a bit shocking. I thought, wow, that can happen? Your life could just change continents and cultures in an instant like that? Scary. Also, while in law school, I was clerking at a Quincy law firm during the summers. It happened that a family member of the older generation became involved in a water drainage dispute of some sort, and the attorney I was working with had scheduled a deposition in his office for that family member and the married couple on the other side of the argument. I don't recall which side we represented. I was just a clerk, so it didn't even matter. A court reporter was also present. The attorney was asking my family member the relevant questions when suddenly I felt compelled to gaze intently at my relative's face. The family resemblance ran so strong in his features, it seemed. He looked so much like my grandfather. In the next moment, a powerful seizure took control of his entire personage. They called it a grand mal heart attack. which may not be completely accurate, but it was total, whatever it was. I was seated on a little settee a couple feet away, and the court reporter, he and the court reporter were sitting across the desk from the attorney. The other parties were seated facing me across the room in an office that was just big enough. As the seizure quickly progressed in a matter of a few seconds, I felt compelled to lay my relative on the floor. I went to him, lifted him from under his shoulders, and holding him close, I bent over him and, turning him slightly, placed him gently down, my face inches from his own. Before I could remove my left arm from under him, I watched a bright, silvery wisp of cloud rise from his lips and vanish into thin air, literally in front of my eyes. Everyone in the room was frozen and staring in shock like a pack of owls. I asked if anyone knew CPR. No one responded, so I went running out to try to find some sort of help. None in the office, none on the street. I headed for the courthouse across Vermont Street. The world was in slow motion and the concrete felt like quicksand. It was not the best few minutes of my life. I wasn't gone long, but an ambulance was there when I got back, and the nurses said he was gone. I already knew that because I had seen him leave. A few years later, the special effects team on one of the Harry Potter movies captured the Silver Strand phenomena all too accurately in the scene where Sirius Black has a near-death experience at the hand of the Dementors, but is saved by Harry's Expo Patronum spell. I don't know if anyone else in that office that day saw what I did. I didn't ask them. But it was high strangeness indeed, and it was real and had consequences. That was my first close encounter with someone's transition out of here, but it would not be my last. This was probably a traumatizing event, I suppose. Everyone was pretty shook up. Did anyone get counseling? This was the 1970s. What's counseling? Shell shock could still be cured by a good slap in the face per General Patton. We possibly took a day off or went for a walk. So, I graduated from law school, passed the bar in Illinois and Arizona, and Barbara and I returned to the farm in Illinois, where I sit as I type this, and started our family. Henry came first, then Nate. Just as my dad had gone to Russia with the Farm Bureau and the State Department, business took me to China with the first U.S. trade exposition to Beijing in 1980. I should mention that on that first trip, we visited the Great Wall. And while unattended in an ancient tower, I felt moved to carve GH plus BH into the stone with a Swiss Army knife. You could carry anything on a plane back then. Why do that? Do you really need to ask? I've been married a long time, and even then I knew when I got home it would go, "Did you see the wall?" "Yes." "Get any pictures?" And I wanted to say, "Oh babe, better than that." If, fellow husbands, you prefer to miss that opportunity with your spouse, I cannot help you. For any would-be trolls out there, it wasn't deep. They have probably sanded it out of there by now, and it's not like I knocked the wall down or anything. I'm not advocating the vandalism of World Heritage sites either. I'm saying I love my wife and it was a simpler time. What is scary is not even that I feel the need to explain my actions back then, but rather how much more complicated things must get for today to be someone else's simpler time some 40 years from now. Also, on the first trip to China, one of our team was Chinese and had family outside Beijing. They took me to visit their relatives in their modest home. Like my own farm family in an earlier day, they did not yet have electricity or running water. Meeting a Westerner was their own encounter with the unknown. When they learned I was a Baha'i, they politely asked, through my friend's interpretation, what that faith believed. I told them in a few sentences, and they replied quite diplomatically, "That is very universal." You may notice that I have not told you what I told them, and that is because some of what Baha'is believe might not seem relevant to this story. Yet. I mention these two incidents because although in the grand scheme of things they are unimportant and should go unnoticed by the world, they offer a little insight into my own character arc in this story, as promised. One other interesting thing about that first trip was that we stayed at the Friendship Hotel, which had been built by the Soviets, long known for their friendships, I guess. When we checked in, they gave us our room number but no key. They said nothing will be stolen, and it wasn't. I was naive enough to think they were all that honest, and they may have been. If I rose early enough in the morning, I could watch the two-wheeled, horse-drawn carts carrying the night soil out to the fields beyond the city. Such honesty seemed reasonable to a guy who lived in a place where people left their keys in the pickup truck in case somebody needed to use it. Of course, it may well have been that every staffer in the whole place was Chinese intelligence, a very likely scenario in hindsight. Other business trips to both China's and the Far East followed, and I finally saw the coast of Vietnam safely from a Pan Am 747 while en route to Singapore. I confess, it made me ask myself regarding Vietnam, was all that really necessary? My parents were aging, became snowbirds, and bought a house in Tucson, Arizona. Later, my dad sold it and built another house himself in Oro Valley just to the north and on the west side of Mount Lemmon. By himself, I mean he took out a carpentry team from the Payson area and had them build it right. No one who knew him would be surprised by that. While visiting my parents at Christmas one year in the 1970s, I went to a movie theater to watch the Patterson-Gimlin film footage of Bigfoot that had been taken back in 1967 in Northern California. My first impression was that it looked real to me. It still does. I didn't know what to make of the vocalization at the end of it. I had no point of reference. Over the years, I have listened to plenty of recordings of vocalizations and have personally heard lots of very odd animal calls, as I will describe when we get there. But I have still not heard the bellowing scream that makes your innards turn to jelly, nor am I in a big hurry to become experienced in that way. I have my favorite arguments that, for me, prove the Patty footage is authentic, but I am not here to convince anyone of anything, so those arguments are not relevant. Think whatever you wish. It's okay. Oh, before moving on, when the 125th anniversary of the American Civil War came along in 1986, which historian named Grant was voted most likely to participate? Of course. So one time while I was away at some reenactment, when we were living in the Gray House, one of my sons saw a guy in period clothing walk into our den door from outside, and he thought it was me, like I had come home or something. But of course, nobody was there. Also, we often visited my parents in Tucson at Christmas time. My sister also lived there, and one day during such a visit, she called me to see if I could help her get a great horned owl out of her bedroom. It had come down the chimney. Chimneys in old Tucson ranch houses aren't as tall as those in the Midwest, and this one must have lost its flue. The owl had come down and flown into the bedroom. I arrived, opened the bedroom door, and startled it as it sat on the headboard of the bed. It shrieked at me, spreading its wings as it did so. It looked to be 2 feet tall, and its wings seemed almost as wide as that California king. I shut the bedroom door and said, "Let's wait until your husband gets home." My sister told me later they were able to get past it, open a window, and it flew out. It was an imposing presence. Its shriek did not sound like what I heard as a kid. And that's the end of chapter 8. So I think we'll stop there. Thanks for listening. See you next time.